Hey guys, had some questions on filing the depth gauge. Okay, a lot of different names here, but its proper name is a depth gauge. So what, without going in, I don't want to get real long on this with what does it do. If you're not really understanding how this tooth works, check out, I got a video there that explains how the tooth actually makes the chip. So you might think of, well, what does this do? Well, one answer would be it sets the thickness of the chip, right? It determines the thickness of the chip. That's true. But another way of answering that same question, what does it do? Let's think of it as it controls the power of the reactive forces. If you're cutting down with the bottom of your bar, the reactive force, is going to pull the saw away, top is going to push back, and then you've got that dangerous kickback reaction. So the relative thickness of the chip, if it's a thicker chip, it's going to take more power for the tooth to cut it. That power is translated as the reactive force. So what we're doing when we file these down is we're really doing a very tight dance here between the rock and the hard place thing, right? In that we're trying to get a chain to cut fast. At the same time, we need to be able to control the saw. It's a tricky thing to do because we're not cutting a square log, right? Basically, normally if we're cutting wood in the woods, it's round, and then we're cutting large pieces and small pieces. So if we take even, say for example, that large log, think about when we first make contact on the top of the log, there's only a few teeth cutting chips. Well, those few teeth could cut a thicker chip. But as we work our way down through the center of the log, now we've got a lot of teeth making chips all at the same time. So those teeth need to make a little bit thinner chip so that the saw has the power to actually pull the chain and the saw is in control. Obviously we can't change that, so I hope you follow what I'm saying is it's a really tight walk there with getting that chip thickness in that sweet spot. So we like to use these file plates, okay? And I'll try to get that in the light so you can see this was marked for a 3/8 chain. Make sure you're getting the right gauge for the right chain. If you're using 325, at a glance it looks the same, but it's going to be marked for 325 and it will be cut slightly different. How does this thing work? Okay. So what we're doing there is when we set that plate on the tooth, if it's a brand new chain, when we set that on there, I'll try to get that so we get the angle right here. I'm hoping you can see that that depth gauge should be just flush with the top of the plate. That would make sense because it's a new tooth and really nothing would be changed. As the tooth gets sharpened, right? We shorten the tooth this way. The working corner, because of the slope of the top tooth, lowers. So then each time, say I would guess, it's a rough number now, every 3 or 4 times we sharpen the chain, we'd want to be setting that gauge on there, and eventually you're going to start to see something like this. Tried to get it in the light there for you, sorry. But you see where that depth gauge is starting to protrude above the plate. You leave the plate right on the chain, and you'd file that off until it's nice and flush, all the way around both sides. So that notch on the end, that actually sets right down on the actual chain itself, and then your depth gauge is going to come up through. They're marked with a hard and a soft. I wrote it on there. See, hardwood end and softwood end. So that's just referring to the density of the wood that you're cutting. A softer wood, hardwood. So you need to dance around with that a little bit to figure out which end works for your saw. Obviously, power head size, bar length, density of wood, and all of that plays in there. But what I've seen is, and this is a little snafu that I've seen, where when we actually file that, we need to be really sure that we're holding that plate 90 degrees to the bar. And what I've seen some folks do, and it's fairly common, it's similar to hand filing chain. I think most of us would agree that we have a side that we can do really well, very easily, and then we switch around and we can kind of do it, but it's not the same. It's a little bit awkward. It's the same thing with holding this and filing that plate. Be careful that you don't find yourself tipping the plate a little bit of an angle on one side and then be more accurate all on the other side. Our chain speed on these newer saws, it's running roughly 40 miles per hour, plus or minus. So at 40 miles per hour, if we get a little sloppy on setting the depth gauge here, even by a thousandth of an inch, one side to the other, the chain is going to eat toward that thicker chip side, ever so slightly, right? It's only a thousandth or two per tooth, but at 40 miles per hour, it's going to give you a chain it's not going to want to cut nice and straight. So if it works for you, I kind of think of it's like a mindset, if you will, when I'm setting, when I'm sharpening chain and setting the depth gauges. I think of it as the difference between a carpenter and a machinist. A carpenter probably working with 1/16 of an inch, 30 seconds if you're really, really close. But a machinist, they're working with 1,000th of an inch. And that's really the way I think you want to be working with both sharpening the teeth and setting the depth gauge. It needs to be right. When it's right, life is good. It gets a little bit off and it's pretty frustrating. Hope that helps. Take care, guys. Couple tips on maybe modifying this plate a little bit. I have seen chain, different brands, different manufacturers of chain, where this doesn't fit on just like right out of the package, you just go for it. There's two things. One, depending on the depth gauge style you have on your chain, you may have a reduced kickback style chain where the depth gauges don't come through that hole, okay? They're too large. You can take a round file and ream that out. Just open that hole up, make it for your chain. I've seen the same thing on the width of that groove. You can file that out a little bit. That's not going to change anything about the thickness of your chip. Okay, one other thing. What I do is I don't know if I can show that on the video here, but on one corner, I'll flatten that crimped edge. I grind it off so that that's perfectly flat. I can use this now to clean the crud out of my bar rail. So it kind of makes it a 2-in-1 tool. Okay?